All right, welcome back to another Renaissance Technologist video. I wanted to make this video to include in my GitHub portfolio page showing a deployment of the Active Directory domain services software on a Windows server. So what this project is, first and foremost, shout out to Josh Madakor and Course Careers. It's really changed everything for me, because one of the things that we hear, whether in cybersecurity or in IT or anything tech related, is that many of these exams and the certifications are very theory heavy, multiple choices, and I don't think anybody will argue with the fact that hiring managers want to see experience. And it's very much a chicken and an egg situation. I'm in the middle of it right now. I think I have about 70 plus applications out there. It's a numbers game. And I am trying to really convey the message that I'm comfortable with this technology, whether it's networking, whether it's working with the Windows environment, whether it's remote accessing, all these different, also ticketing systems. I had a phone interview not too long ago, and it asked, and one of the questions was, do you have any experience working with a help desk ticketing system? I do not, but I do have a project where I deploy an open source ticketing system, OS Ticket. And what I'm going to be doing is, one of my next videos, or the next video, is going to be using ChatGPT, which is actually going to be cool. It's going to be fun putting it together, because now ChatGPT has a voice response chat, so you can talk to it and it replies back. So I'm going to prompt it to act like a user, and I'm going to act like a help desk person. And I'm going to prompt it to say an entry level issue for me to troubleshoot, and to act like the user, and I'm going to ask you questions, and you're going to explain to me what the issue is, and I'm going to try to troubleshoot it. So that's going to be pretty fun. This video is about Active Directory. I came across Active Directory initially through cybersecurity, and why I realized that the pivot to IT was important for me and a logical precursor to a career in cybersecurity is because in cybersecurity, one of the domains, pardon the pun, that'll make sense with Active Directory, is, or one of the attack vectors that these bad actors use is trying to break into Active Directory and performing some vertical or horizontal escalations within Active Directory. And I'm like, what the hell is Active Directory? And Active Directory is a software that centralizes the management of users and network devices. It's, for all intents and purposes, right? I don't know if this makes sense, but so it's like a content management system, but for users and networking devices. And you can, it's where you have to reset your password, where you can be one user and log in on any machine within your company, because your account, your privileges exist on the domain. So no matter what machine you're on, you can log in because you have a profile in that domain. And you could also do group policies and issue permissions or restrictions with a group policy, and it propagates to those different users that it applies to, depending on if it's in a particular organizational unit, meaning either if it's for the accounting department or the HR department or the sales department or these kinds of things. So that's what this project is. We are going to be deploying. So what we're going to do is we're going to be deploying 2 virtual machines in an Azure environment, because who has the money to buy physical machines and the software. That's why it's a beautiful time that we live in, because we can leverage virtualization and these different cloud platforms like Azure or AWS or Google Cloud. But I choose Azure, Microsoft Azure, because that is the dominant player in the enterprise game. Most corporate organizations are using Microsoft software. So that's why I really want to leverage that and really get proficient in Azure, which I already have the Azure Fundamental certification. So 2 virtual machines, 1 server 2022, and then another Windows client. So the Windows server, we're going to install Active Directory on it. We're going to create 10 dummy users. We are going to allow remote desktop access, and then we're also going to deploy the client machine, and then we're going to connect that client machine to the domain. And then that way, the dummy users that we create in the domain from the Windows server, we can log in and do what we want from that one client machine. So all the 10 users, the 10 dummy users, can use that client machine. So we're going to show how that deployment and the configuration works out. So, all right, see you on the inside. All right, great. Here we are on the Azure portal. As is the case when we are building new skills, especially in IT, and we are trying to simulate real-world environments, there is no other methodology than to rinse, repeat over and over and over again, so that much of these tasks and knowledge base becomes second nature. We are trying to train ourselves to acquire the skills, the on-the-job type of skills. In my case, much of us, we might be flying blind, and we are doing our best to follow the tips and recommendations from those people who are in the field, who are expert, who are currently working as IT professionals. So I say that to say that I already have an environment built up, and I've been practicing. I think this is my 4th or 5th time going through this. So there's going to be a piece of, there's actually something that I'm going to try to experiment here and just capture it. If it works out, capture it on the recording, and I'm gonna talk it through, and hopefully it makes sense. I'll discuss what I noticed and what I'm going to be experimenting with, because it's something it's something particular to the Azure environment. It wouldn't be the same. It wouldn't be the same if you are working with real hardware, physical hardware, because by default you are creating a virtual machine. So how are you going to access that virtual machine? So by default, Azure allows remote desktop connections, RDP, the remote desktop protocol, to be initialized for people to log in automatically. By default, if I'm not mistaken, that's set to off on physical machines, and you have to actually go in there and configure it to be on, to be permissible. But because how else would you be able to, if you launch the machines and didn't have anywhere to remote in to create like a virtual environment, how would you, you would have to find some other way, right? Anyway, you'll see what I mean. Okay, so here we are on the Azure portal. I already created a resource group because I've been working on this lab multiple times to become familiar with the deployment process. So I have already created a resource group. Now resource groups are, let's call them, I don't want to use the word container because I don't want to kind of go into the Kubernetes and kind of confuse the concepts, but let's just call it, it's like a directory. It's a way to, you create a label and you create a resource group, and in that resource group, it allows you to categorize, segment certain resources so that you can track and monitor billing and organize your deployment, your architecture, your topology. It's not the same as something like a subnet or these kinds of things. It's just a way for you to visually organize the machines and the resources that you have. All right, so I've created a resource group. So what we're going to do here is let's talk about what we're going to be working on. So what we're going to be working on is we are going to be deploying a Windows server, and we're going to also be deploying a Windows client. Now that Windows server, we're going to be installing and implementing the Active Directory services. So that is what we're going to do, and we're going to work through all of the steps that need to happen in order for that to occur. So let's see. So this is kind of like a more general. These are the two. This is a more detailed walkthrough, and this is kind of like a more general thing that we're going to be doing. And so, you know, because I've worked on this a few times, and so what I'm going to do here is, because I've worked on this a few times, I'm going to move a little quickly. Okay, so this is the breakdown. It's going to be a little detailed. This is the breakdown what we're going to do. This is on the left side is a little more detailed. On the right side, it's more general. And this is not going to be a step-by-step guide. I have that in the snapshots and outline on my GitHub. I'm going to try to move a little bit quickly here so that I can show a little bit of dexterity and proficiency with this. And so I'm going to kind of do things that are a little bit out of order from how I've laid it out, because there are opportunities to group and lump different deployments, different things in one go. So this is what we're going to do. So first, here's what we're going to do. So this is the resource group. What we're going to do is we're going to go to our little virtual machine dashboard here. And I'm going to start deploying the virtual machine. All right. Now, because we've already created that resource group, we're going to place the virtual machine in the resource group. We're going to call it DC1 for domain controller. The disk image, meaning the operating system that we're going to choose, is going to be the Windows server. I'm going to choose some credentials. I'm going to do lab user, and then we're going to create the password. Okay. And see, this is what I noticed before, is that by default, this is going to be allowing RDP. And so later on in this presentation, we're going to be doing a group policy object. We're going to be implementing group policies, and this is something that we would be including in the group policies, because by default, when you're connecting physical machines, this is defaulted to no, do not allow RDP. But obviously, because this is a virtual environment, how else are you going to remote into these machines? You know, The other option would be like SSH, but that's typically used for like a Linux. Here, this is a much more, what would you say, a much more GUI oriented, how would you say, much more GUI oriented experience Windows is, right? It's much more developed, right? So that's, this is already defaulted in. So we're going to experiment this with this. We're going to experiment with this a little bit later. Okay, and so this, we're going to just leave it for the standard SSD. That's fine. Now networking. In my resources, I'd also created a virtual network, and it's I don't want to go. It's pretty standard. What you want to do is you want a virtual network. Because we're creating this work environment, we're going to be creating a network that is going to represent the corporate environment. Later on, we're going to be doing some other videos where we're going to subnet it. So it's going to be maybe accounting, maybe human resources, maybe IT, maybe whatever other department you think that you want to kind of segment and kind of create. We're going to experiment that in another video. But for now, everybody's going to be part of the general virtual network, and it's not a big deal. So you see, I've already created one, but you just create a new. You get to name it. It doesn't, and it's like a one-step kind of name and submit kind of thing. So there's not kind of much to discuss there. So we're going to create this we're going to create this server and put it into the VNet. And why this is important, because now you're going to see, because you're creating the virtual machine, what Azure is going to do is that it's going to start creating other additional resources, not just the machine, but it's going to create an external IP for it. It's going to create a network security group, which is kind of like a network access control firewall, so that it's not an external firewall, but it's a firewall that exists on call it the virtual network, so it can manage those resources that are trying to talk to your resources. So it's like an internal firewall. So let me show you what goes on there. And we'll see exactly what the different resources that are going to be deployed here once this screen refreshes. Submitting deployment. Okay, great. So it's going to be creating the IP, it's creating the network security group, and it's creating the storage resources. That's all connected to this one virtual machine deployment, all of the things that we need. This is the actual machine itself. Let's call it the server. Okay, the deployment is complete. And so here's what we're going to do. We're going to lump up, we're going to, like I said before, we're going to lump together different checklist items. So right now what we're going to do is, now again we're going to deploy the client machine. So let's call this client 1. And the operating system is going to be Windows 10 with 2 virtual CPUs, 8 GB RAM. You can use the same credentials. I do, no problem at all. Keeps me from having to remember all the different credentials. Okay. Move over to disk. Let's go with the default SSD for storage. Networking defaults to the virtual network that we created before. Great, perfect. Now it might fail because I think I need to check a checkbox about Windows licensing or something like that. Yeah. I forgot to check that checkbox. It's the licensing. So you have to check that in order to accept the licensing agreement for Windows software. Okay, great. Let's create that. Deployment is complete. So now let's check out our virtual machines. Okay, great. Now you see that we have client 1 and DC1 on our virtual machine dashboard, and these are the public IP addresses to the different machines. So DC1, now we're going to remote desktop into DC1 and start configuring and actually deploy Active Directory services. And you'll notice the different looks. So what we'll do here is that we're going to connect using our Microsoft Remote Desktop for Mac. And you see that I've been working on this before, so we have different IP addresses here. So this is the IP that was issued before. This is the new one. Let's save that. And while we're here, let's take the new IP for client 1. Come on, come on. And update that. Excellent. Okay, so now let's remote desktop into our Windows server. Now I want you to notice this, because it's a working group, it's not part of the domain yet, because we haven't installed Active Directory, because we haven't made it a domain controller, there is no domain environment. Even, the things that we're actually going to be doing is we're going to be converting the server into a domain controller, so that whenever a computer is joined to that domain, and kind of I think that environment, you have to specify at that point, once we've done with the step that you're going to see, we need to specify what domain, what environment, what context it's called, what context what context are you trying to log into? In this case, since we haven't done any of that yet, it's considered a working group. So it's either local working group or it's a domain environment. So we just use the same credentials that we used when setting up the system. Did I type that correctly? Okay, so what you'll see here, we're going to just hit yes for this. And if you're familiar with the Windows environment, you automatically notice that it looks a little bit different, right? Windows Server. And I'm sorry for the window that's cut off from the recording. And it's not going to capture everything, unfortunately. Let me see if there's any way to manage this. Well, let me fix this view, and then I'll come back to it. Okay, we did the change, and because I wanted you to be able to see these different, because we're going to be using this little toolbar, this little menu, this little toolbar here. And so what you'll notice is that this is going to change. We don't have access to Active Directory users and computers. It doesn't really make any sense because you don't know what we're missing here until we deploy it. But this is the Windows Server environment. It looks a little bit different. So the first thing we're going to do is go in here, add roles and features. I'm going to do next, next, next. And we're going to install Active Directory, domain services. And hit next. Great. Next. Next. Restart the destination if it's necessary. Okay, and then we're going to install. Okay, great. Feature, the installation is complete. Okay. Now we have to promote this server to be the domain controller. And here we're creating that environment that we talked about, the context. So we're going to create a new forest. What is the domain? What's the environment? What's the context that you're going to be creating for this enterprise environment? So let's just, we could be, now, if one of the things that I want to mention when we talk about domains, with forest, domain services, it should spark, should make your ears perk up in terms of DNS, domain name, the domain name service, right? And so we are using a domain. It's as we're typically used to seeing it with a .com, a .org, a .edu. That is going to be the context, but then we're going to need to resolve that. So these are just different things that kind of stuck out to me as I was learning this stuff. And so we can whatever domain, whatever your name.com or whatever the business name is, theunitedway.org or, jpmorganchase.com and that kind of thing. And so these are different recovery options. We don't have a DNS delegation to select at the moment, so we're going to hit next. The NetBIOS domain name. So as you notice that we had a mydomain.com, and once this becomes a domain controller and becomes a domain context, you see our login is going to be the domain / and then your username. Now this option, if you have a really long domain name, then it becomes annoying because you'll have to type that out, and so you can, here is an option to kind of shorten that. It's not the name of the domain, but it's going to be, it's a way to use it. So I'm going to put, let's just do, I'm going to do CJM. Those are my initials, right? And you'll see what I'm talking about. You'll see. Something short so that, obviously this is something that if you're going to be, something that's going to be specified in the work environment, not something that you're going to choose arbitrarily. But you'll see what I mean when we get there. All right, so we're installing. This takes a little bit of time. So let's see, I might just pause the video and let this finish installing. Okay, so it was installed and we got booted out because it needs to restart. So while that is doing that, let's see what we can do. So let's just kind of come back here. Now, part of the thing that so once we deployed the server and we've promoted it to domain controller, what we also need to do next is that we need to make that domain controller, the IP address, the internal IP address needs to be static. meaning that because of DHCP, Dynamic Host Configuration Protocol, right, Dynamic Host Configuration, meaning that that IP address might change if it's set to DHCP, but if it's static, since it's going to be the domain controller, every device is going to need to be able to find that IP address, and if that IP address is changing, then it's going to make it's going to have connection issues. So what that we need to make that static. Now there's two ways of doing it. We could remote into the desktop and set it from the IPv4 configuration settings, or we can do it here from Azure. And I like to do it here from Azure because it's much more direct. Okay, so we go into the machine, and then we go into network settings, and then we go into the network interface card. And here, you see that it says private IP address dynamic. Now let me move this. We need to go into, let me bring that back. Now we click on that. Let's set that to static. 10.0.0.4 is the private IP address. Great. Let's save that. Now we've made that static. Fantastic. Okay. Now let's check to see if, whoa, okay, oops. Static, perfect, okay, great. Now let's check to see if we can get back into all right. Now this is our top level administrative login credentials, which is why we don't need to explicitly but what we're going to do is we're going to create a different administrative user so that we're not using our top line, top level super admin credentials, so that we can simulate someone working in our organization that's an admin and has all the rights and permissions, but does not have access to that, super user, super admin credentials as a point of security. Okay, great. Here we are. Now, what we'll notice here, once we access these tools, we have access to the different Active Directory features, right? And so users and computers, we're going here first. Now, while we're here, now what we're going to do is that we're going to create a number of different organizational units. A different way, kind of like a directory, directory approach is just a different way of view of segmenting the different departments, different resources, different things, different categories, let's say, within your domain, for you to be able to apply group policies a little bit more efficiently, and for you to manage and visualize different the different areas of your business. So you'll see what I'm trying to do here. So we're going to do an organizational unit first. And what we're going to do is we're going to do admins, and then we're going to do another one for client machines, into clients, and then we're going to do another one for employees. Okay, great. And if we kind of go here and we do a little refresh, it'll just organize that a little bit better. Okay, great. And so now while we're here in admins, like we said before, we're going to do a new user, and we're going to let's call her Jane Doe, and we'll give her a login ID as Jane admin. And you'll see here, see, this is the NetBIOS domain, right? So normally this would have been like my domain, but who wants to type all that stuff out? To log in, you got to type out this whole thing, this domain context. So, right, so we're going to do Jane admin, and we're going to give her her credentials. I hope I typed that out properly. The passwords don't match. Okay, now here's the caveat. Just because you created a new user in this admin folder, it doesn't really give her admin rights. We have to go in, we can do add to a group, let's go add group, or you can do properties, right? In properties, you see member of, and then we do add. Or we can kind of come here and we can do add to a group. We're gonna add to a group, and she's gonna become part of the domain admins group. She's going to be part of domain admins group. Okay, great. And how do we double check that? Like we did before. Let's go to properties. We go member of. She's part of the domain admins. Great. Okay. Perfect. Now what we're going to do here is let's log out, and we're going to log back in as Jane admins. All right, so now let's just show what I was saying before. And that's okay. Now, I just want to show you that you have to specify the context. Or not. Maybe because she's an admin. I'm not really sure what happened there. Okay, now we're logged in as Jane Doe. Okay, great. And so she's an admin. Great. Okay, now let's look at the. Okay. Jane Doe is an admin. All right, now what we're going to do is we're going to create a bunch of different dummy users, and that's the screenshot from my GitHub. Where is that script? This is a script that the super gracious Josh Madakor wrote or found to create a number of dummy users using PowerShell. It's a PowerShell script to create dummy users. And so we're going to come here. Fantastic. So we're going to copy this raw file, and then we're going to come here and we're going to do PowerShell ISE, but we're going to run PowerShell ISE. We're going to run it as an administrator in order to be able to modify and push users in. Come here. All right, and I'm not an expert in PowerShell. I've only used it a minimal number of times, but you know, as you can see here, it's creating a bit of an algorithm here to create some random names with some while loops, and then it's defining a function, and then it's filling them into the variable, and then it's using these PowerShell commands to create these users. So not 10,000 because it's just unnecessary. So let's just do 10. I'm going to run the script. Boom, boom, boom. You see it's kicking it out. And then let's just do a check here, and we'll see that they've been pushed into the employee. So now we have these dummy users. Excellent. So we have the dummy users. We have our admin. Now let's connect the client machine into the domain. And we're going to connect here. We're going to connect to the client machine. Why can't we use Jane admin? Because that client machine is not part of the domain yet. So I'm glad I did that mistake. So you can see that we have not, and the password's correct, we have not connected this machine to the domain. So then obviously I cannot add, Jane admin is a domain admin, and the server is got the Active Directory domain services going on, but the client machine isn't joined to the domain yet. So that's what we're in the middle of doing. So all right. Now, while it's doing that, one thing I want to talk about, what you're going to see is we're going, first thing that we need to do is we need to, by default, the IP configurations for this client machine are set by Azure using Azure's domain name service server, DNS server. So it has a default DNS server that it uses, provided by Azure. We have to set that to be the domain controller, the Windows server that we deployed, because every Active Directory server comes with its own DNS, because we've specified a custom domain, right? So Azure is not going to know anything about our custom domain. So if we use their DNS server, they're not they're not going to know how to resolve mydomain.com. So we need to set the client machine's DNS server to be the domain controller server. So what we'll see here is we can run this as administrator, that's all right. Like, I want to show you that if we do ipconfig all, you'll see that the DNS server is this Azure server. We need to make that the domain controller private IP, which is what we made static, 10.0.0.4. Okay, and so let's just, for example, should I show you? Let's do that. Let me show you how this is going to fail. It's not going to be able to resolve. Actually, that's not where I wanted to go. Wait, I wanted to go, where do I want to go? Think. Okay, here it is. There's different ways of, I could have got there through there, I think. I'm pretty sure. No, that's advanced scaling settings. Okay, advanced, did it? No, all right. I'm pretty sure there's different ways of getting there. This is the way I know how to get advanced systems. And so we're going to go to the computer name, and we're going to change the name or the domain. And so here, what we're going to do is we're going to do mydomain.com. And it's not going to be able to find it because of this situation, okay? So now what we do is we go back here. Cancel. We're going to go back to, we got to go back to the network. We're going to go into the Ethernet settings. Can I get there through this? Is it more direct? No. I'm going to go here. We're going to change the adapter settings. We're going to come here, come to properties. We're going to come to IPv4, come to properties, and now obtain DNS server address automatically. No, we're going to use 10.0.0.4. Okay, great. And now if we come here and do it again, now 10.0.0.4, excellent. Okay, now we come back to systems, about, advanced system settings, computer name, change, domain, mydomain.com. We've got to do it as the admin. Okay. Great. Welcome to mydomain.com. Excellent. It's going to ask us to restart. Restart now. Now it's the my experience with this with this restart is that it's not going to restart. We're going to have to do kind of like a fresh reboot from here. We're going to have to stop the machine and then relaunch it from here. We'll test it. We'll test it one more time. But what we want to do here is, so you say that it gave us the welcome. So that means, I should have shown you this before. When we would have looked here, this would have been blank. But now, since client 1 has joined the domain, and the step that we just did, now this client is here in the computer. Now we're going to do this, and we're going to move this computer into the client's folder because we're going to apply some group policies to this folder. So all the machines that are in this organizational unit is going to be subject to a group policy, like a password lockout policy, or a remote desktop access policy, or a number of different policies that you want to apply to this. That's what organizational units help us to do, to apply group policies a little bit more efficiently. But let's see if we are able to log into client. Okay. Okay, this is the part where I'm kind of interested in doing a little bit of experimentation. So at the beginning of the video, we noticed that by default, these virtual machines are launched with RDP access, remote desktop access, set to, it's enabled. Typically, in a physical machine, it's not enabled, right? And so part of the group policies that I wanted to implement was that we would enable it by default, but it is enabled by default. At least it seems that way, right? And so, but there are two kind of permissions that, you're enabling your ability to log into the machine via RDP, meaning it's opening up that port. That port is being allowed to be communicated with. But then there's another access control that's, okay, so even though the machine is allowed to communicate via RDP, the other one is who is allowed to communicate over that. And so now what I'm trying to say is, like, we have these users, okay? And we know that Jane was able to log in. And I'm going to run this experiment. Let me log out of here. Jane is a admin. And but Sifi Luno. Let's try Sifi Luno. And here, let's be a little bit. Sifi Luno, and it was password 1 that we created from that script. Password 1. Okay, it should fail. Okay. You don't have permissions. Okay. But what my point was that RDP, to communicate through RDP, is allowed by default on these virtual machines. But the who is not established. So what I want to do here is I want to kind of do it kind of backwards and see if it works. I want to give permissions to the who and see if it works, because it's already set to allow by default. So what we'll do is here, we're going to go into my domain and we're going to apply a new group policy, and we're going to call allow remote access. Okay, and now we're going to open this and we're going to configure the permissions. And normally, right, we would come here and we would go to local and user rights access, and we would do allow log through remote access. And it says not defined, but as you've been seeing that we've been able to do it, right? Because it's by default. So I'm curious. I'm going to do this. I'm going to do restricted access. And here, we're going to add a group. And this is what we're going to do before. So, but this is kind of we're going to do two group policies. One group policy is going to be the allow remote access, but then there's two components to allow remote access. The allow, like what you just showed, but now we also have the who is going to be able to get into. So we'll do here remote desktop users. Okay. Now, members of this group, who's going to be a member of this group? The domain users are going to be a member of this group. Okay. Apply. Okay. Okay, great. Now, I've been having issues with this forcing these group policy updates. I've tried to do it on the client machine, to kind of push this through. I've tried to do it on the server machine, but sometimes the only way to make it work is by a full refresh. So let's do that. I'm not going to try. Let's do a full refresh of this client machine. And for some reason, sometimes when I do a restart, I actually physically have to stop the machine and then start it up again for it to do a restart that I'm hoping for it to do. All right, so I just got a call. I have to hop to work. This is stopped. We created the two group policies, and we created the two policies. This is the allow remote access and the account lockout policies. And we're almost done with this lab. Once I get done with this job, I'll be right back to finish this up. So see you in a bit. We're back. So I have a little bit of a break. I might need to hop in a little bit, but I wanted to continue with the experimentation. So here we are. What did we do? We created the group policy on the client machine, saying that all remote desktop users are going to be all remote desktop users are part of the group. All domain users are part of the remote desktop user group in the restricted users security group. What does that mean? These are all, if I'm not mistaken, network access controls. So just because Azure defaults to allow people to log on to these machines via remote desktop, it depends on who it is. So there's got to be two things that got to be done. And that's the first one we're testing is allow remote desktop access on the machine. And then the second part of that group policy is of those remote desktop, who are the users going to be? So I tested this already just 2 seconds before starting to record, and I found one of the users, and because there's a group policy that exists saying that all domain users are going to be those allowed in, the group policy that we did not create yet one of the features, details, caveats of the remote access is we did not include this piece. Allow logon through remote, because it's by default it's on through Azure, and so I wanted to check if that was going to be kind of rolled over. But we did do this. Restricted groups. We did say restricted groups. Members of this group are going to be all of domain users. Okay, so we're here. Cife Luno. The password that we created for them was password 1. Unable to connect. What I also wanted to do, I want to come here and I want to do a I don't remember if I did a group policy refresh. Can I do on the client machine before I stopped recording? Let's do that and then try one more time. Let's go to CMD. Let's run as administrator. Let's do a GP update force. Okay, great. Let's log out. What was this guy's name again? Cife Luno. Not a real name. Interesting. All right, let's do. Is that the right backslash? Okay. That password 1. Boom. So it did work. Okay. So that here's the detail, right? So what did we find out? We found out that because when we launched the let's put it over here. We found out that because when we create the virtual machines, by default Azure has to allow remote desktop, or not has to, but it's an option, right? For you to be able to remote in, configure, have the remote desktop experience. So that is permitted. But I'm pretty sure, based off of another boot camp that I'm doing, that on physical machines, remote desktop access is off by default, and so you have to switch it on. And then in addition to switching that on, meaning people can log into the machine, you have to specify who is able to actually log on besides that, in addition to. So what we have here is where is it? Is it user right agreement? Okay, here. Allow log on through remote desktop. We did not allow it. But for sake of completeness, let's do that now. And this is how we would do it. What are we doing here? Allow log on through remote desktop services. Correct. What are we going to do here? We're going to do, what happened here? What are some other options here? We do remote desktop users here. Let me check to see something. Previously, in my other lab, what did I do? Allow login. We did that to be domain users. Okay, domain users are able to initiate, and then we added, once I figured out, what you see here is all the stuff that I figured out that's when I realized that we had to add domain users to the restricted group. And then added domain users. This was a mistake. this needed to be up here, which caused me some problems, but I cleaned that up eventually. I figured that out. Okay. So while we're here, let's just remove this. And okay. But anyway, regardless of the fact is that because of Azure's what would you call it? Configuration, default configuration, optional default configuration on launch, that this is on by default. And we are logged in, right? Even before setting this up. So with that, I don't want to make the video too long. What we demonstrated in this video was the deployment of the Active Directory services. We launched 2 virtual machines, 1 Windows server and 1 Windows client, elevated the the 1 Windows server to the domain controller, and then we joined the client machine to that domain. And we had created these 10 different users, and now we can log in to that domain with any one of these users by way of just using one machine. So let's just finish up with logging in with one of these other users that we did not use yet. So let's say CJM is the domain. Let's do Lakadaji. I read these names as if they're real, but they were just randomly created. Lakadaji, and then the... Ooh, I wrote that wrong, didn't I? Okay, perfect. All right, so we see us logging in. Perfect, wonderful. And with that, thank you very much for watching, and stay tuned for the next one.